Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you on behalf of India Habitat Center and Mr. Benoy K Behl. Today's talk and screening is the third of the monthly series, Glimpses of Culture. For those of you who were not with us for the earlier talks, I will give you a brief introduction of the speaker. Benoy K Behl is a filmmaker, art historian, and photographer who is known for his tireless and prolific output of work over the past 45 years. He has taken over 53,000 photographs of Asian monuments and art heritage and made 145 documentaries, which are regularly screened at major cultural institutions across the globe. His photographic exhibitions have been warmly received in 74 countries around the world. His book, The Ajanta Caves, is one of the most widely read books on Indian art history in the world. His recent book on the art of India in 2 beautiful volumes is already in its 3rd print run. His latest books are Buddhism, The Path of Compassion, The Buddhist Heritage of Sri Lanka, and Hindu deities worshipped in Japan. Mr. Behl is also known for having photographed the Buddhist heritage of the world across 20 countries. He is the first Indian about whom the American National Geographic magazine has done a major story. BBC World News have carried 3 news items about his work in India and in Vietnam. Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Benoy K Behl speaks to us today and shows his film Indian Roots of Tibetan Buddhism. He will be happy to answer your questions after the screening and talk. Kindly put your questions in the chat box after the film. Thank you and enjoy the program.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you very much, Sujata Chatterjee, for your kind introduction. And thank you very much, Renu Oberoi, for another wonderful event organized to share beautiful aspects of India's rich culture. In fact, India Habitat Center has been most wonderful in sharing my work. Ever since 1998, when Habitat Center sponsored my photographic exhibition, it has been a regular sharing and the taking of this work to the audiences. Thank you so much. My many thanks also to the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, who so kindly sponsored the making of the film which you're going to see today. Ladies and gentlemen, we are often surprised when we look at the world 2,000 years ago, in the beginning of the first millennium. We are surprised to see a climate of vibrant intellectual search, a climate of debate and discussion. There is this unerring logic which has already been developed. There is the study of the human mind, a study of the reality around us, a study of knowledge. What is knowledge based upon? What is knowledge itself? And all this carried out with unrelenting sincerity and with acute logic. In fact, if we see the great universities which were already coming up at that time, if you look at Nalanda, if you look at Takshashila, if we look at Balkh, if we look at Paharpur now in Bangladesh, there is such rigor, I'm told to increase my volume a little bit, yes. There is so much discipline in the approach to subjects. There is such a vigorous intellectual climate. As a matter of fact, when we look at these universities and we see the fundamentals of study and research and the proposition of theses which had been developed, we find that we can trace from here, from these great Buddhist Mahaviharas or universities, we can trace the development of universities, in fact, all the way till Europe. For instance, the Buddhist university at Balkh, now in Afghanistan. And I must tell you, it's a wonderful place. It was dangerous to visit there, but what a great historic center! What a wonderful place it is. Now, Buddhist Mahaviharas like the one at Balkh got converted to Islam with the coming of Islam. The subject of study changed, but the manner of study, the manner of the organization of the university, the fundamental frameworks of the study remained the same. And from here, eventually, European travelers and merchants saw these universities and took the ideas which they found at these universities all the way to Europe. And by the 12th century, the first European university had come up. About 1200 years after rigorous intellectual pursuit and study at these Buddhist Mahaviharas. Now, what is important here is also the importance which is given to the understanding of life. The numerous years, the time spent by great intellectuals in furthering this pursuit with no materialistic objectives, a desire to understand what it is all about, to liberate the human being from the bindings of his desires, to rise above, to awaken the Buddhahood, the enlightenment, the knowledge which there is to be found within. So this film, ladies and gentlemen, is about such great universities and their legacy, which fortunately does continue even till today. It gives me great pleasure to share this with you, and I would request Sushant to please run the film now. Thank you so much. In 1991, I photographed the paintings of Ajanta. These 5th century paintings which are hidden in the darkness of caves in Western India. These are the most revered and the most beautiful paintings of the entire Buddhist tradition.
In all the countries of Asia, they speak reverentially of this site. The paintings of Ajanta changed my life. The gentle beings of the art permeated my consciousness. Every time I looked at the paintings, I was carried away. There was an infinite warmth, humility, and compassion in these paintings. It was expressed in every gesture, in every glance. It was indeed a world of compassion which took me over completely. A journey began to discover the philosophy, the vision of life which underlies these great paintings. Leading experts on Buddhist art said that my photographs showed the Ajanta paintings in their true and luminous colors for the first time. Universities, museums, and cultural institutions from around the world invited me to come and lecture on these paintings. Everywhere, people responded with warmth to the sensitivity and compassion contained in the art of Ajanta. These are, in fact, the very qualities which people associate with Buddhism. However, many asked questions about current practices in Buddhism, particularly in the Himalayan regions. These appear to be rather different from the early compassionate faith. Was this Buddhism really? How did these changes come about? Join me on a journey through the history of Buddhism. Let us see how these transformations took place in Buddhist practice. Gautama Siddhartha was one of humanity's wisest teachers. He was born in 563 BCE, the son of Sudhodana, the ruler of the Shakya clan. Sudhodana ruled from the town of Kapilavastu in the present-day state of Uttar Pradesh in India. At the age of 35, Gautama attained Bodhi, the knowledge of the eternal truth. Gautama Siddhartha taught a profound ethical message to the many followers who soon gathered around him. He spoke of the pain in our lives and pointed out that this was because of our own desires. The way to do away with the pain was to lose our desires. The majority of Buddhists belong to the earlier austere form of Theravada Buddhism. They believe that it is through self-discipline that they can give up worldly attachments to proceed on the path to salvation. There are also Mahayana Buddhists. They believe in Bodhisattvas. Bodhisattvas are beings on their way to enlightenment who have delayed their own salvation to help others on the path. Besides self-discipline and personal development in order to lose our confusions and desires, we can also pray to them for their help. And then there are the Vajrayana Buddhists in the Himalayan regions of India, in Tibet, southern China, Mongolia, and in Japan. They appear to follow colorful and magical practices. They seem to be very far from the concepts of Buddhism as we understand them. The Cham dance of the Lamas signifies the victory of knowledge over ignorance. In Buddhist thought, the greatest evil is the ego. It is that sense of the self which is the greatest illusion which we must lose in order to gain true knowledge. The masks cover the ordinary day-to-day nature of the men and present instead the qualities of the deities within them. There are peaceful masks and those with wrathful expressions. To understand the practices of the Lamas and to understand the history of later Buddhism, we have to turn to Nalanda and other universities of Eastern India. In the first millennium, great Buddhist monasteries were established in the plains of Eastern India and in Kashmir. These were intellectual centers where the science of the mind was studied in great detail. The finest intellectuals analyzed the path, the steps on the path towards Buddhahood or true knowledge. They sought to create a logical path which would lead us step by step towards that knowledge, a path which would work for all. These vast universities had hundreds of teachers and students who came from across India and from the many countries of Asia that had embraced Buddhist philosophy. The greatest of these was here at Nalanda. Here there was a spirit of vibrant intellectual thought, a climate of discussion and debate.
One of the most important universities in the world was developed not in the medieval West, but right here in India. And here I'm referring to the university consortium of Nalanda, Vikramshila, Somapura, Odantapuri. All of these various universities were instrumental in producing people who were capable of understanding and articulating what it means to have universal knowledge, knowledge that's applicable across cultures and across times.
Something which is so unique of Nalanda University in terms of its knowledge and wisdom is the tremendous logic, tremendous metaphysics, and the tremendous study of epistemology, which are all utilized to bring about incredible depth of the warmth in the human being.
Buddhism and like Jainism, we have no sort of concept of creator. So one's own salvation must achieve through one's own effort. Now, the main obstacle about salvation is ignorance. There are many different levels of ignorance. So logically, the antidote of ignorance is knowledge, not prayer. And then also, you see, the basic Buddhist approach is from this level, without sort of waiting blessing, but one's own sort of effort, and step by step become Buddhahood. So therefore, in order to practice effectively, we have to know about mind, about emotion. So therefore, those Buddhist texts, also including some Hindu sort of tradition where practice of shamatha and vipassana there, naturally the explanation about mind automatically come. That part I consider science.
India is having the galaxy of scholars. These Nalanda, especially the Vikramshila University, was the many scholars. It is very difficult to pinpoint this is the scholar.
Nagarjuna has a very, a significant place in Buddhist philosophy. He has, as I see it, propounded the Madhyamika philosophy, which is the philosophy as demonstrated in the Prajnaparamita Sutra. Madhyamika is regarded to be the highest school of thought in Buddhism. So in this, in understanding the reality of the external and internal world, it's very important that the philosophy of Madhyamika tells us that the entire world is interdependent, and they do not have any inherent existence, they do not have any essential existence, but they are interdependently originated.
Then in the case of Nagarjuna, so without such established monastic universities, very big established monastic universities, how come that one individual person can have such coherent, very precise, and able to articulate these concepts so beautifully? So how can that be possible? And then likewise, it is not just Nagarjuna. Then Nagarjuna's student, Arideva, for example, his writing, 400 stanzas. So you look at that, there's such a richness. So from these, I got the idea that, at the time of Nagarjuna and Arideva, there already must have been existing such a big monastic, so well-established monastic universities with a rich tradition, which a long tradition of intellectual rigor and depth and sophistication. So from this, I would say that Nalanda University, which the history tells that it was at the time the Nagarjuna, I would say that should go even beyond Nagarjuna's time.
The high-altitude plateau of Tibet, lying to the north of India, received Buddhism in the 7th century. King Songtsen Gampo had 2 wives who both followed the path of the Buddha. One queen was from Nepal and the other was from China. This led him to take a deep interest in the Buddhist faith.
The most overwhelmingly impressive and inspirational thing for me about the Tibetan traditions of Buddhism as received from India is the way in which those great masters of the past went to such incredible lengths to not only go and get those teachings and bring them to Tibet, but the masters, the Indian masters who travelled, went through incredible hardships, and they were willing to put those lives on the line or even sacrifice those lives for the good or the benefit of this much greater vision in which the whole of humanity, particularly perhaps the Tibetan people in the case of bringing Buddhism to Tibet, but in a larger picture than that, the whole of humanity in preserving those traditions for the future, preserving the knowledge, the wisdom, the meditative practices, the Vajrayana, the tantric practices, all those things, that great treasure of understanding and capacity for human beings to enlighten themselves.
History says, Dunkars give the references, when the Buddhism in Tibet developed in 2 phases. Now, one is early phase, other is later phase. First phase begins from 7th century to the end of the 9th century, means 842 something like that. In this period, from India, almost 51 scholars and the Pandits were invited. Then after second phase of development, it is said almost 121 Indian scholars visited Tibet. They have contributed. They have revised the text which was earlier been translated.
Tibet did not have a written script till the 7th century. The acceptance of the Buddhist faith entailed the understanding of subtle philosophic concepts and profound commentaries. This transfer of knowledge would not have been possible without translating and writing it down. A very sophisticated language and a script capable of preserving this knowledge had to be formulated.
Oh yes, Tibetan language or script is very much copy and very much similar. Because it's based on one of the ancient Indian script. Once Buddhism reached Tibet and started translation, then the vocabulary which in Buddhist tradition then translate into Tibetan, not available in Tibetan language, so created new words. So therefore eventually the Sanskrit vocabulary or Sanskrit terminology and Tibetan terminology go exactly the same.
So this language became potent enough to translate Sanskrit word into Tibetan exactly in the same meaning and the same purpose.
It was in the 8th century that Acharya Shantarakshita of the Nalanda University was invited to Tibet to teach Buddhism. He brought with him a great system of monastic teaching, which was based upon a deep study of the principles of logic. He taught the Tibetans to focus on fundamental concepts such as what is our knowledge based upon? What is knowledge itself?
The Acharya Shantarachit, the first person who established Buddhism in Tibet, and he emphasized the Tibetan people to learn the Buddhism not by faith but by reasoning, by logician, and by analyzing the things for oneself, as Buddha had told, not to believe which has been said by Buddha, but to understand by oneself through analyzation and through a rational mind.
There were some practitioners, but there were no tradition of monkhood in Tibet, in Tibetan community. So Shantarakshit has greatest contribution in establishing the monastic community in Tibet.
So what he did was that while the richness, the main content of this whole legacy, which is in the form of philosophy, so that he started to impart by means of the logic. So he introduced logic there in Tibet. So with this study of logic, then you can't really escape. You can't really have room for diluting the concept. So the logic is like a very precise container. So with this container, you can see what is really there. The measurement is so accurate. So there, the philosophy, which is like the content of this container of the logic, it was so freshly preserved in Tibet.
So I think Tibetan quite fond, use Nalanda name. So all Tibetan tradition, come from each different tradition. Their original sort of masters all come from Nalanda. So I usually describe Tibetan Buddhist tradition is a pure lineage of Nalanda tradition. So I also, start from age from 6, 7, already start memorizing these texts of Nalanda. At that time, I do not know who is the author of these texts and come from which sort of was the institution. I have no idea.
Atisha was another great teacher who was persuaded to go to Tibet in the 11th century. He had studied at Nalanda and was a teacher at the Vikramshila University, also in Bihar. He helped to make the philosophy understandable to common Tibetans.
Perhaps his unique genius was to be able to take all of this very esoteric information and condense it into a form that could be understood and used by anyone. Another very interesting aspect of universal knowledge is that it can be condensed and transported. Atisha was also instrumental in the condensation of this knowledge so that it could be taken out of the university context, perhaps transported into another culture, and then take root. And this is one of the things that happened in Tibet in the 11th century.
He was amazingly learned, and his signature kind of text, the light to the path, the lamp to the path to enlightenment. This text formed the basis for the later school of the Gelugpas under Tsongkhapa, and formed the basis for the gradual path to enlightenment, the Lamrim, that became the signature of that school. This particular path, became of such huge importance in Tibet, and yet Atisha was one master of many in India. And I think perhaps when you consider that lineage of masters that came, you can say that they must have represented a very small number of those who were in existence in India at the time. And yet those masters in Tibet now, whose works have continued, have been preserved there in a way in which Indian Buddhism wasn't preserved in India. And so in that sense, the Tibetans have played a hugely important role for the planet, if you consider these teachings of great value.
We know about a few of the great teachers of the Nalanda University owing to the writings of the Tibetans. What a place Nalanda must have been, and what a great society it must have been out of which all this was born. A society which gave so much importance to rational thinking and the logical search for knowledge. Truly an intellectual society.
Nalanda may have produced thousands of great scholars throughout the time. His Holiness Dalai Lama has enlisted 17 kind of leading outstanding scholars of Nalanda monastery throughout the time, and he composed a prayer to all those 17 outstanding scholars.
The universities of the plains of Bihar in medieval India had to have been incredible places to be at the time. When you think about the thousands and thousands of monks and scholars that were concerned with the most important things every day, year in and year out, we must understand that there was something incredibly special going on here. This was not a pastime. These were the most important aspects of human experience that were being developed, concentrated on, for the good of humanity. Imagine something like that. Here in the modern world, we're used to thinking of everything as being marketing-driven and money-driven. This instead is being driven by the evolution of consciousness, the growth of consciousness, the growth of compassion.
I think since Buddhism flourished in Tibet, whole Tibetan way of life changed. Buddha come from India. So therefore, we Tibetan, look India as something Arya Bhumi, a very sacred sort of land. Tibetan, then you should consider such Tibetan who once went to India, some study and speak Sanskrit or Pali, and they have a little bit sort of higher status. India, sacred land. Anything from India is something very sacred, very holy.
The monasteries re-established in South India are of the larger monastic institutions in Tibet. and they continue the traditional study of the all Tripitak through its commentaries.
Buddha himself, you see, they advise us, "O my follower, bhikshus and scholars should not accept my teaching out of faith and devotion, but rather through thorough investigation and experiment." So that way of approach is, I think, very suitable in modern time. And the scientific-minded people, you see, loves that kind of way of approach. So perhaps I think in modern time, see, people who not easily sort of accept things, rather through investigation, experiment. So such people finds Buddhist way of approach is more realistic, more practical.
In the Indic civilizations, I think one could go much wider and much deeper. You could ask questions: why are we here? What is the nature of God? What is the nature of the self? What is the purpose of human existence? You know, these things are the subject of great dialogues. It's much closer to the Socratic dialogues. The Socratic Plato dialogues are very much of the same pattern as the Indic dialogues.
So this knowledge is a pure knowledge. It has nothing to do with dogma. It has nothing to do with, a religion as such. So therefore, I call it as the legacy of India, the legacy of the world. So it must not disappear. It must remain for long.
India is an extraordinary country. Mother India, really, Mother India. India is one of the most religious, wrong word, the most spiritual countries on earth, because Indian people have a very deep understanding of the spiritual life.
In the history of human civilization, India has been one of the great originators of culture and religion. Indian culture has done for the East what the Greek and Roman culture together did for the West. And therefore you will find all the way from Afghanistan to Indonesia and all the way to Japan and China and Korea and all the countries of South and Southeast Asia has the impact of Indian culture on their language, on their customs, on their art, on their music. It has been an extraordinary saga.
One of the great miracles in the story of man is the spread of ideas across formidable natural barriers of high mountains and vast seas. Ideas do not know political and national boundaries. The ready acceptance of the ideas of life by the people of faraway lands underlies the sameness of human life and the human condition everywhere. Perhaps the greatest example of the travel of ideas is the vast spread of the Indic concepts of Buddhism and Hinduism in ancient times. These ideas were warmly accepted wherever they went. From Sri Lanka in the south to Mongolia in the north, from the river Volga in the west to Japan in the east. This spread was not through military conquests, but simply through Indian traders. The people who heard them talking about philosophical matters wished to know more. Here was a philosophic vision which appeared to bring peace and happiness in one's life. Therefore, Indian teachers were cherished and sought.
So therefore, I always describe, or when I met Indian, I always say, you are traditionally our guru. We are Chela. You Indian are our guru. Then also I mentioned, we Tibetan, not only Indian gurus Chela, but also quite a reliable Chela. That means in guru's own land, Buddha Dharma, a lot of ups and downs, during this period, we, your Chela, kept throughout, you see, through centuries, we kept your knowledge intact. So we are quite a reliable Chela. So our relation is something very unique, Guru and Chela.
Knowledge and humanity rolled into one. His Holiness the Dalai Lama presents the perfect combination of these virtues. My grateful thanks to him for his warm words, which not only awaken so much knowledge in us, but at the same time, kindness and compassion. So we see a world in ancient and medieval times in which the search for the truth was a matter of great sincerity, logic, and passionate pursuit. And knowledge was so beautifully developed. His Holiness says, India, sacred land. I've had the good fortune to experience that in my travels through remote parts of Asia. I've often been in places where, or have sometimes been in places where people may not have seen an Indian before. And the greeting has always been so warm. You are from India, the land of knowledge. Truly, there is great effort, there is great study, there is a pursuit of knowledge. There is an importance given to knowledge, which made all this possible in ancient times. I'll be very happy to answer questions. Ms. Renu Oberoi has not been able to join us today. So I'm requesting Sujata Chatterjee here to please look in the chat box and to see if there are questions which I can answer. Thank you.
Yeah. There's a question from Mr. Godan Nambudripat saying, is this film available online or to buy? Want to show to many friends.
Yes, if you were to look on YouTube, if you look at the public diplomacy channel of the Ministry of External Affairs, Government of India, and you put in Indian roots of Tibetan Buddhism, you will find this film. Thank you.
Somebody is saying respects to His Holiness the Dalai Lama.
Indeed, as they say, all true philosophy leads to goodness. And what a marvelous example of that His Holiness is. There is a warmth which flows out of him in everything that he says. Thank you so much.
Mr. Pratik Arora has just posted the link to the film. Thank you very much, Mr. Arora. That's very kind of you.
Thank you.
So till more questions come, maybe I can read out the other comments. Lots of thank yous. So beautiful presentation with deep knowledge. Thank you so much from Cheng Suchiat. Sanjeev saying, very nice, enjoying. Somebody else whose name is not here. Thanks, Benoy, for the lovely film. Godan Nambutripad. Thank you, Benoy. Great film. Uniquely captured the theme. Urmi saying thank you. Sharda Srinivasan saying lovely, thank you. Narayanan PM saying sad that we do not learn any of this in our history texts. Thanks, Benoy.
Yes, and again I take us back to the fact that the universities were so highly developed at that time, between 1,000 and 2,000 years ago. We see, for instance, when a thesis is presented, there's a very formalized structure of the discursive argument. When the thesis is presented, all the points in favor of that thesis are given, are enumerated, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, etc. And simultaneously, all the points against that thesis are enumerated. Subsequently, each point is taken for and against the thesis. And then you have the propounding of so many points for and against that point. As a matter of fact, all this is done so in such a formal and disciplined manner that these are the structures which help to trace the influences of these universities and how they traveled from place to place and from continent to continent. The important thing, I guess, is that this is all a sincere pursuit of knowledge. It is not, as His Holiness Dalai Lama points out, as the Buddha said, do not believe me or follow me out of devotion, but do so with inquiry, do so with experimentation. And that is where all this knowledge is as much spiritual as it is scientific, for it is based upon experiment. It is based upon observance. It is based upon what we see. Thank you.
Sushant wants to ask a question. There's somebody called Nilima Bhatt who has sent a question to you. So can Sushant please ask the question on your behalf?
Yes, please.
Good evening, everyone. Sir, Nilima Bhatt has asked a question, actually two questions. First one is, how did Tibetan Buddhism take on such a different expression than in the rest of India or Sri Lanka or etc.? The second one is, how and why do you think...
I will answer, Sushant, I'll answer the first one first, and then I'll request you to read out the second one. It is popularly called Tibetan Buddhism today. And indeed, it is very well preserved by the people of Tibet. However, the roots of this school of Buddhism begin with Asanga and Vasubandhu in the 4th century in the valley of Kashmir, and then at the Nalanda University. It is they who founded the Yogacara school of Buddhism. It is they who created a path step by step through meditation, through yoga, towards enlightenment. And this was subsequently developed further and developed into the full-blossomed Vajrayana school, which was taken from the valley of Kashmir by the great Guru Padmasambhava to Ladakh, Lahore Spiti, Kinnaur, the whole of Tibet, Arunachal Pradesh, Sikkim, and Bhutan. So those are the roots of Vajrayana Buddhism. As a matter of fact, some of the deities that you see in Vajrayana Buddhism, for instance, the earliest known depiction of taras dates back to the 5th, 6th century and are found in the Buddhist caves of Maharashtra. The first Buddhist mandala is again seen in the Kanheri caves on the outskirts of Mumbai. This is again 5th, 6th century. So also the 11-headed Avalokiteshwar, that is so popular in Tibetan Buddhism, is seen for the first time in the Buddhist caves of Maharashtra, specifically in the Kanheri caves. So it is a broad development which starts with Asanga and Vasubandhu and goes on to so many places. And here I would also like to mention that you may not find so many representations, or you may not find any representations of Asanga and Vasubandhu in most countries. But it is Japan which has beautifully preserved the memory of these great founders of the Yogacara school. And if you were to go to Nara in Japan, you would find in the temples the beautiful sculptures of both Asanga and Vasubandhu. Thank you. I'll take the second question, please.
Yeah. How and why do you think Buddhism was not kept in the purity that it has been kept in Tibet? That's Nilima Bhatt asking again.
There is a constant evolution of thought, and it is to the credit of the Tibetans that they in fact created a script and developed a vocabulary in their language to be able to fully understand, preserve, and pass on the very complex thoughts which were presented in Indian development of Buddhism. It is truly it is not a simplistic faith. It depends upon great logical understanding, a pursuit of a study of the mind. What is the mind? How do we respond to things? What is our knowledge based upon? And all these very sophisticated ideas needed a very sophisticated language and script to be able to convey. And it is to the credit of Tibet that this huge amount of information and this marvelous in-depth information was preserved in Tibet, probably better than such information may have been preserved anywhere in the world. And this great logical faith presents us always the opportunity to look within ourselves and to benefit from the earlier study of thousands of great scholars before us. Thank you very much.
There's a question by PM Narayanan asking, as Tibetan culture and tradition is facing huge challenge now, do you think this will survive our time? If yes, where?
This is very deep knowledge, which is important for humankind. As a matter of fact, we live in modern times that are extremely materialistic around the world. Therefore, its greater value. And scientists and so many others, thinkers, intellectuals, all over the world have realized the value of these thought processes, of the scientific understanding preserved in Buddhism. Therefore, I think there is every likelihood that all over the world this will be preserved. As a matter of fact, I've had the joy of interviewing and speaking with leading scientists working on the frontiers of science in Paris, at the university, in USA, and other places, Germany, who, while they work on the frontiers of conventional science, are also deeply interested and see deep similarities between conventional science and what they see in Buddhism. Therefore, I think that this knowledge has a very widespread and is surely going to last in many ways across the world. Thank you.
Shweta Prakash asking, is Kashmir Shaivism influenced by Buddhism?
We are speaking of paths towards the same goal. The goal is Brahmananda, or it is enlightenment. It is a joy of enlightenment. It is leaving behind the pains, leaving behind the shackles of the material world, of being able to lift the veils of illusion and to see the truth which is beyond. And each great thinker sees the truth, and the path towards the truth is created by him in his own personalized way. In fact, the wonderful thing about Indian philosophy is that all knowledge is experiential. It is not just that yoga, which is the basis of all Indic philosophy. It is the action part of Indian philosophy. As His Holiness Dalai Lama says to me every time I've discussed yoga with him, he says, all of Buddhism is yoga. And so are the other paths. This is the action part of Indian philosophy. And it is all to do, whether it is in Buddhism, whether it is in Shaivism, it is all to do with leaving behind the illusions of the material world and being able to proceed, to see with greater clarity, to gain knowledge, to gain Brahmananda, or to gain Buddhahood. Thank you.
Pratik Arora asking, do you think evolution of a philosophy as is associated with Buddhism and its integration with local beliefs leads to something far more interesting and relevant, or is the initial or pure form more applicable throughout?
The truth may always be the same, but it has to be experienced by each individual. And in the experiencing of the truth yet again, the truth is alive. And it is this living reality of the truth which often incorporates the very personal experiences, the very personal culture of the person who is looking at the truth. Therefore, the truth for each person can look a little different. But finally, if it is true, it is going in the same direction. Thank you.
Well, there's a nice compliment I talk once in a while. It's good to intersperse questions. By Dipankar Mukhopadhyay saying, feel a fullness in mind at the end of each session. Thank you immensely.
Thank you very much. Very kind of you.
Thank you, Habitat Center. Thank you, Benoy from Godan Nambudripad. And some questions have been answered amongst themselves, so I don't know whether there's a question, any point in asking it again. So I think Renu has joined us now. You can ask her to close unless there are more questions.
Are there any more questions?
So there is one question from Stan Loy. He says, what is your views about Navayana Buddhism founded by Dr. Ambedkar?
As I have said, the truth is always the same. And yet, in the living personal experience of each person, the truth acquires different color. And all the different colors are very important, as are all the colors of the rainbow. Thank you.
Godan Nambudripad asking, I was wondering if the recording of this session will be available later.
This is likely to be available on YouTube.
Benoy Behl.
On the channel Benoy Behl.
Hi everyone, and on behalf of the Habitat, this is Renu. I'd like to thank all of you for joining the session today. And I'd also like to announce that our next session is on Saturday, the 20th of November at 6 p.m. And the title of the talk and screening is Ancient Land of Tripura. We look forward to having you all with us again. Thank you so much once again for joining the session.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Renu. Thank you all.